Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. Let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. I also want to give gratitude to Salvi Media. They're the founding sponsor of the podcast. They're a premier executive content agency dedicated to crafting exceptional content and strategies that elevate companies' brands and their executives. They're creators of the Emmy Award-winning CEO series. I think many of you have seen that. We've also featured one of my portfolio companies, Analyst Investors and Hallow, on their CEO series. And they've had in-depth interviews with CEOs talking about their personal journeys and business experience. The CEO series can be found on Cheddar, Entrepreneur Magazine, Reach TV, and really want to thank Salvi Media for their support of the podcast. You can also follow them on social media, as well as they have a podcast studio in Chicago. Join them as well. So again, thank you, Salvi Media, for making this podcast possible. Today we have amazing leader, dear friend, somebody who's been in this technology industry for a while on the global stage with global company and has a board perspective. I think that will be interesting to share. Please welcome to the podcast, Jesús Mantas. Jesús, how are you?
I'm good, David. Great to be here.
Oh, well, excellent. Well, Jesús has a distinguished career. Recently retired and an advisor to IBM, where he was a global managing partner of IBM Consulting. So we'll touch a little bit on that. He's an independent board of directors at Biogen. A lot of cool stuff going on in that space that we'll look forward to jumping into. He's an advisor to the NASDAQ, right? And a lot of different nonprofit and other leadership roles that Jesús has. So that's kind of the corporate side, and I'm sure there's more that we'll double click and get into. But Jesús, we always love to start off with this exponential growth podcast of just you and your story. I know a lot of it. I don't know all of it, but I know a good chunk of it. But please share your story with our listeners.
I think it's a familiar story of the combination of what good education and good family values can do for somebody. And I think that's kind of like the most important thing as I look at my career is I was born and raised in Spain. Great family that taught me the values of working hard and never have entitlements. And I was fortunate to have a very good education. I did a master in engineering in Spain. And I came to this country basically as an immigrant with the expectation of being only 3 years in this country and then come back to Spain. But 3 years turned into 31 now. So I spent the first 3 years with Ernst & Young as a subcontractor. And then I joined PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting as a manager. 3.5 years later, I was already a partner. I was admitting as a partner. And then a year after that, given all the Enron situation, every auditing company had to divest the consulting side because
those interesting times.
Yeah, the more successful you were in audit, the more limited you were in doing consulting. So that's when IBM bought us in 2002. And then my career in IBM has been a succession of really interesting projects and really interesting missions. So I never really intended to spend 22 years in IBM as I spent. I intended to spend 2 to 3, but every 2 to 3, there was a very interesting mission that gave me more responsibility, more learning. So I did things from running a consulting business in North America to go into Latin America, live in Brazil 4 years and running the Latin America business, to running the business process outsourcing business globally, to eventually combining that with the consulting side and running what we call business consulting globally, to running strategy, innovation, and corporate development, doing 14 acquisitions, and then coming back on on my last role, which was leading half of the unit as business transformation services, and I just, as you said, recently retire and remain connected with the group.
Yeah, wow. And then, and so this exponential growth podcast, you've had it in your career, but you've also worked with clients and business transformation. A lot of that is how do you transform and grow exponentially against your competitors. So you have a good purview in not only your own career at IBM, like global technology leader, a lot of amazing things that they've done, but also working with amazing clients, right? Um, so your exposure to those, when you think about the two, three kind of technologies that are driving exponential growth that our listeners should just keep top of mind, kind of what are they and what you see and what advice do you have to them around those?
Yeah, I mean, from the foundation perspective, I think now because we're used to it, it's very easy to take for granted the internet and cloud computing. Like we're just used to it. But when I started, when we were the first time that we were doing mobility applications. So I actually made partner because we created mobile applications in the year 2000. That's 7 years before the
Wow.
iPhone actually even existed. Uh,
Yeah.
so to do that, just to create the server side of your mobile app, it would take a month. It would take a month to actually go and get a physical server into a rack, and then you had to install the operating system, and you have to have the networking, and you have to build all the security, and then you have to have the user credentials and the backup and the image, like all of these things in a typical data center. I mean, you could expedite it and maybe make it like 1 week.
Yeah.
But today that takes about 3 seconds, and it's a line of code. And
Exactly.
so for some of us that have seen that, I still like really get excited about, all the cool things that happen on top of that layer still
Yeah.
were created by this revolutionary technology that was the internet applied to B2B, and the internet enabling cloud computing in a way that took that out of there. And I think is relevant for where we're going in the future. Once you have that, then artificial intelligence, I think that kind of explosion over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years. It's a
Yeah.
fact that I didn't mention is my thesis when I studied engineering in Spain in 1992 was a neural networks applied to speech recognition. So it was
Yeah. Yeah.
it was the first generation of deep
Yeah.
learning. So you can basically say, 33 years later, or yeah, that's 33 years. Can you believe it? I have quite an interesting view as well of the journey of artificial intelligence, but because we have all of this cloud computing and we can access all of these on-demand resources like GPUs and other things, that was almost like a precondition in order
Yeah.
for this next generation of artificial intelligence to happen. Like the people that have been born when that was a given is like you don't appreciate how much that foundation was
Fair.
required for the next, right?
Fair.
I
And what
think
it was like pre that foundation, right? Because pre that foundation, you gave one story,
you
but
can
there's
do it.
a
Like
lot
if
of
you
other
would have
stories, right?
tried, yeah, you couldn't build a foundation model without cloud computing. Like you just couldn't, right? It would take you a year to just
Or
put the servers on the racks.
Or no, the other thing is like, can you imagine, like, you remember the time when to get onto the internet, right? You had to, connect in and dial up, right? And you had that, and the speed was brutally slow. Maybe, and so how far we have come is amazing. So yeah, and I think, my kids and others, like, they don't appreciate all of that base foundation that was laid.
And I think that perspective is good to project on, like, what am I excited about the future? The future is kind of fairly uncertain, and you have kind of like both categories of the pessimistics and the optimistics on AI. And I think that perspective of saying, well, we probably couldn't have figured out what was going to happen to AI when we created cloud computing. It's just, it was required as a foundation for us to evolve and create value on top of that platform. I think that's going to happen on AI. I think we are now creating over the next few years or months, depending how fast we go, like this AI platform that is going to give us this power to now focus on the layer above it. So you're not going to have to worry about things like writing simple code because the thing is going to do it. And you're not going to have to worry about like a lot of the pattern recognition, preparation of the data, all of these things. Like the month that became 3 seconds in the computing is going to be the same thing, but now it's going to happen at the work layer, right? Where a month is going to become 3 seconds at the work layer. And the things that today take us 3 weeks to do we're going to be able to do in 3 seconds, which is where I think the number one skill that I get very excited about in leadership is creativity. Because is the only limitation as to what you can do is going to be how creative can you be on creating that next layer of value.
Right. It's the idea and the creativity because you can have somebody put a model on it. You can have somebody put a strategy on it. You can have somebody, not somebody, you can have a AI write the code for it. But the creativity part, that's that's the sweet spot.
And it's not easy to replicate. It's like if you just look at a Picasso and you look at it, you could copy it. And copying, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it, but a lot of people can do it. But the tough part was creating the original one. Is from nothing, from a blank canvas to create something that is remarkable and it will withstand the time. And that's why creativity is something that um, our leadership, in leadership roles, I don't think we emphasize enough. I think we're starting now together with curiosity, together with learning agility, but it's very interesting. There are studies right now that are starting to conclude that the actual number of years of experience that somebody has in a job is not predictor of success. So, but like 99% of our hiring is focused on that. But creativity, agility, curiosity, that is a bigger predictor of success than how many years of experience do you have doing something. I think it's a world that excites me, that is kind of like that new world that we're going on top of this AI layer.
How would you measure curiosity or know if somebody has it or not? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there's psychologists out there that I'm pretty sure there are many PhDs. I don't know very well how to do it. I think it's a little bit like quality. Do you remember that book about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle? And
No,
that
no,
entire
no.
book has a lot of pages describing what quality is. And it's one of those things, is like, well, quality is like very, very hard to describe, but you always know when you have it.
Right, right,
You
right,
can
right, right, right.
always tell this is quality, this is not. But if you describe, okay, tell me what quality is. I love that portion of that book. I think it's a little bit like creativity. You know when you see it. You can tell
Yeah.
creative, not creative. I think it's very hard to describe, but I'm pretty sure that organization psychologists have many ways to measure it.
Yeah, I think because kind of where I was going to is I think a bit of creativity is experimentation, right? Like, and it's a little bit of mindset of having an idea, and a lot of people have the ideas, but very few are willing to experiment, test, fail, and then maybe try another one, right? And that's I think in this world that we're on, I think that I think experimentation is a muscle builder for creativity, right? At least that's my perspective, right? But then there's probably more to it than that, but just one area. So yeah, so no, definitely. So you laid out the kind of the foundations, AI, and what sits on top of AI is something that you're really excited about. Any other kind of growth technology things that excite you,
Yeah,
Jesus?
I mean, the one that I didn't mention, but we will see a lot more of it in the next 5 years, is quantum technology.
Hmm.
Because it is getting I mean, it's almost like being when we were making a transition with transistors. And I still remember, I mean, I was already born in the age of semiconductors and transistors, but I worked with people that they hadn't, and they actually went through that. Talk about disruptive transitions, right? From vacuum tubes to transistors. I mean, that was shocking. And the first time that you could put a million of these things, a million transistors in one chip, in one wafer, that was like I remember. I mean, I think it was probably in the 80s that I went to a show in Germany, and I saw, I think IBM had one of the first like semiconductors where they had put a million transistors on this thing, and it was blowing my mind. And now you actually have some of these things with a few tens of billions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think quantum is we're in that transistor phase,
Yeah,
right? When we're kind of like starting to have it's going to be a combination of hardware and software, a little bit how microprocessors and software created kind of like that race of you need more software for the better hardware, and you need better hardware for more software. I think
yeah.
that race is going to be an interesting one to watch in the next 5 years. The main area that everybody's focused on is error correction on that. But I think the combination of software and hardware will make it what I would say practical. Right now, you can actually solve very interesting theoretical problems, but
Yeah.
they don't translate to a very specific business value. I think we're going to see that within the next 5 years.
You mentioned the big thing was error correction. What does that mean? Uh,
Yeah, basis of computation on a quantum computer is what is called the quantum bit or qubit, and that unit is only stable for a very, very, very small period of time. And what happens is, in order to do a practical, what is that, practical computation, you may need um, thousands, if not maybe a million of those things at the same time. So today's computers still have a very high error rate on that qubit. Now, to be fair, people may not know this, but our normal bits in the computers also have an error rate, but we have built error correction in every one of those chips that redundancy make those errors irrelevant. So the machine corrects them automatically, and that's why you and I are having like this conversation of
right, right.
like like tens of millions of these things that many of them have like single errors, but they're all being corrected. That is the technology that we're focused on right now at scale into the quantum. And the combination of that is not just hardware. It's not just kind of like, well, make the hardware better so the error is not there. That's a very, very hard thing to do because of the physics of it. But a combination of that hardware, doing something in hardware, and then software that adds some of that redundancy, I think is what's going to accelerate that path to give us practical, error-corrected quantum computing.
Amazing. And yeah, for those listeners out there, really it's going to power so many changes and industries and solve problems that we never thought we could. And it's like you think about the power of the computers that we have right now, and then multiply it by a million or more as software, as it's coupled with software, and what opportunities that creates to solve really complex problems where you're taking in tons of data, having to crunch it and spit out different scenarios. I mean, it's really, really, really powerful stuff. Um, Jesus, you also serve on Biogen's board, and there's it's exciting industry. Maybe you can share what you can a little bit about the industry and maybe what you see as exponential trends that are in that industry as well.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with biology. And the reason for that is the complexity of the problems in biology is millions of times more complicated than the majority of the problems that we solve on like technology or computing, right? It's like if you can figure out how many ways like a program cannot work or software couldn't work or a computer can go wrong. Well, biology is that times a million. And I really love the way in which nature and evolution has engineered this layer over layers over layers over layers of, in a way, computing, right? It is, our DNA, you can
Exactly. I was just going to go there. DNA.
basically computes with like with four letters. It's actually five, but one is equivalent, right? So instead of being 0, 1, is like 4 or 5 states that match each other, right? Uh, these amino acids that get together, and then those become like sequences, and from there we build proteins, and the proteins are like the elements of like all the chemistry and like this magic of life. We are now getting to understand it a lot more because of all of this progress. So I've always been interested in biology, and I think the role in the board gives me if you want, a very close seat to um, that, but not only from the research and science perspective, but also from the business of medicine, right? So at the end of the day, there is a pragmatic view to the business of medicine, which is, when somebody goes to a hospital and they kind of like fix you, it's like, well, somebody's paying for all of that. And that is an extremely complicated system as well. And it's very different in different parts of the world. Like some countries in the world have what's called a single payer system, where the government basically pays all the bills, and that creates one kind of system. Other systems is kind of like private, where, and in the US, we have kind of like a bit of a mix. So we have part of it like Medicare that is covered by the government, and we have part of it that is covered by private. And then you have all of these relationships between the insurance and the providers and the drug companies and the pharmacies. And it's an incredibly complicated system. So I like the fact that I get to figure out how to operate on that with the mission. The majority of providers of pharma companies, they all agree in the mission, which is to improve health and to cure patients and to prevent sickness for patients. And it's something that obviously I take very seriously. It takes me a lot of studying because I'm one of the members of that board that came from outside of life sciences. So before I joined the board, I was studying for 3 years. So I studied everything about the system and pricing and how it works, everything about providers. Then I studied a little bit of biology, like how does it work? How do antibodies work? I learned a little bit about the central nervous system, which is where Biogen focuses, which is things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson. Why do they happen? Why are they so hard to address? The fact that up until a few years ago, there was no medicine that actually addresses some of the underlying symptoms. Now there is. It's quite fascinating. And what what I like the most is how this kind of passions are intersecting, because artificial intelligence is enabling yet another weapon in terms of how do we better understand biology, how do we better design molecules or antibodies that can be so precise as to address, if you want, the sick cells in your body without touching the rest of your body. Most of the medicines that we take, the issue that we have with those medicines is not only they go after the bad stuff in your body, but they also kind of like damage the good stuff in your body,
Yeah, yeah,
all those
exactly.
side effects. And that's because of the complexity of biology. So it's in my role there in the board, obviously, when you're in a board, I don't get to like do the things, but I get to be a custodian of the long-term value and figure out what is the better capital allocation. How do we continue to promote innovation? How do we make sure that we care for patients? How do we make sure that the access to these drugs is there? It's very interesting problem set.
Well, and then you were talking about DNA and I think you said four or five major elements of that. And it got me thinking about this wolf. Was it the wolf that they brought back, right? And I thought, and I think I read somewhere, and maybe it was like 99.8% of like all the DNA was pretty much the same from what so it was a dire wolf, and then I can't remember what it was like a regular wolf or whatever. They said like 99.9 or 8, whatever. And then they went in and they just kind of did a little, they took the DNA and they did the thing. Where do you see, what are your thoughts on that? On where that technology can go and the just where do you see that can go? There's a lot of things, a lot of thoughts that I have, but I would
I
love
mean,
your
I think
thoughts.
I think that there is a fascinating side about the technology and the fact that we understand biology and how the translational biology, how like, DNA actually ends up creating things that is very interesting, but it also raises a number of ethical questions in terms of, at which point um, are we, we could be doing things that they may be interesting from the science perspective, but they wouldn't be ethical. At which point would we be incurring risks that we shouldn't take? For the most part, I think the scientific community agrees on a set of principles around that. Like, for example, we don't experiment with like humans in that area. But the fact that you can do something eventually means that somebody may try. So I think it's always good to keep that balanced view, which is the more power that we have because of our understanding of biology and the things that we can do, the more responsibility that we need to exercise in using that power. I think is I don't have any objection on the wolf or the woolly mammoth. That is the other one that they're going after. I don't have any objections, but I would recommend that it's always a very robust ethical platform that all of these experiments get done.
Yeah. And then also on your LinkedIn, it talks about and a little bit with your board work at Biogen, but your thoughts around the brain and the breakthroughs in the brain and brain science, and you've got Elon Musk's company that, right, like I can't remember what the name of the company is, right, but they're implanting things in the brain and curing blindness.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, curing blindness and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on just what do you see? Just call it brain, brain tech, brain science. What are your thoughts on what's coming in the future there?
Yeah, I think this decade is going to be the brain decade in many ways. In a similar way, like in the 60s, it became um, the um, uh, the 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 age of activity. Like if you look from the 60s to now, people figured out, if you exercise a little bit more and you make some of these changes, you may end up extending 20 years your life, right? As opposed to so that is what healthcare should be about. It's about um, health issues prevention as opposed to health issues addressing and curing, right? So,
Yeah.
so for the most part, we have made great progress on like our general fitness of the population with a lot of the recommendations and nutrition and exercise. We have made phenomenal progress in the cardiovascular system. I mean, what we know about the heart and how we can treat the heart and how we can prevent or address heart attacks and things like that. We've made a lot. We're making incredible progress in oncology. Like what cancer was 20 years ago, what it is now, and what it's going to be in the next 10 years. There is so much more that we can do now. But when you really look at the brain, we haven't really. It's one of those organs that it is very inaccessible. You can't get to it as easily as you can get to the others. And for a long time, I mean, there's so much of the brain that we don't know. And I think I'm excited that now we're learning a lot more. Again, up until 2 years ago, there was no treatment for Alzheimer's. There was treatment for the symptoms, but there was no treatment for any of the underlying causes of Alzheimer's. Now there is, and now there is a pipeline across many companies of new clinical trials that are being done that hypothetically could stop it. Like, up until right now, you can only kind of slow the decline. That's the best we could do. But we're really understanding a lot more why the neurons degenerate. We're changing things that we thought we knew. Like, we thought for many times, for many decades, we always thought that when a neuron dies, it's dead. You never get it back. And now we are learning that neuroplasticity is something that can happen at any age, that you can actually regain more blood flow for your brain if you exercise your brain, that you can basically create more connections. The brain is it's a very plastic organ. So this brain plasticity, neuroplasticity, we can measure that, we can promote it. So I'm very excited on that area of not only understanding more about the brain so we can address some of those diseases which affect millions of people. I mean, really going to become, it costs society in the order of trillions of dollars, not only on the patients, but on the family and the caregivers of the patient. It's a significant burden, moral burden, as well as economic burden. I'm very excited on addressing that, but I'm also very excited about starting to prevent, or if you want the really focus not only on curing brain sickness, but to actually keeping health in your brain. And I think the next 10 years are going to be fascinating on that, on those missions.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you can stop those things or stop dementia and then actually be able to, regenerate, right, and grow and increase your mental capacity, just phenomenal things in store. And I believe all that stuff. I mean, I believe that's coming. So so on the podcast, we want to talk. So it's great background on the tech and a lot of different areas. Now it's investing, and how do you look at investing across? Yeah, I mean, just different asset classes, right? I mean, there's obviously the startup world that I know you're active in, but you're also looking at other asset classes. And also you've worked at companies that are placing bets and how they're thinking about investing as well. So share your perspectives there, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, it's different on those contexts, right? Because it's different. For example, if a company is investing on another company, there is always probably a reason for it that has to do with the core business of that company. It's like either, like, for example, when we saw Microsoft had their own AI department, but they actually hedge by giving money to OpenAI. So there was a very specific reason why they did that, right? It's like they wanted that hedge. Is like, well, either they're gonna get it or they're gonna get it. Now we have two shots at the goal. So so companies do investing that way. From my own perspective, I try to look at markets where instead of trying to surf a wave, I try to look for markets where the tide is going to go up. Because then even if you miss the wave, you're probably going to do okay as long as you're not going to bet in a company that is not going to exist. So I try to look for some of these long-term trends that are within the next 5 years. There is a reasonable hypothesis that the entire class on the entire area is going to have an upward motion of value. And then on that, then I look at obviously the actual companies. Are they too early and I'm just making a bet? Do they have a proven concept that then is a matter of scaling? And I like to have a portfolio of those. Some of them more in growth stage where, okay, it has been proven and now it's a matter of putting more money to grow it. And then the earlier it is, the more emphasis I place on the actual team.
Yeah. I was just gonna go there. Yep, exactly.
So
The founder and the team, right?
I think it's still a disproportionately important element of it. It's kind of interesting. I've talked to very experienced investors, and um, in their view, it's kind of like the idea is worth nothing. You invest on the team, you don't invest on the idea. I think is how I tend to do it. I tend to kind of like look at these teams that kind of like have this spark. They have a lot of skin in the game. They're putting their own money, they're spending their own time, they're, stressing their own family for it. So that they're gonna really care about success. Hopefully in a market that has this tide, and then I see that spark in the eye, that um, creativity that we mentioned, the curiosity, the ability to adapt. I look for those characteristics.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that, when I look at the portfolio of startups that I've invested in, there's, I invested in founders pre-COVID, and, founders, you're going to get different things that hit you all the time, but you see the resilience of the founders that kind of pivoted, navigated, ran their business, and they kind of survived it and continue to thrive through it. There's a certain, it wasn't all founders, but and then they've went on to do amazing and great things. But I more and more continue to be just reinforce the thing around the team, the founders, as I look at startups to invest in, right? And so that's a good perspective there, Jesus. And thanks for sharing that. So Jesus, amazing career, amazing background, boards, NASDAQ, all kinds of things. What's next for you?
I think the most important thing for me right now is to increase the pace of my own self-education, because the pace of
You're a
change.
pretty smart guy too, by the way. Right. So
But,
this is an interesting perspective, right? Very smart guy, and you say, hey, my biggest thing, I want to increase the pace of my learning.
yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm basically going to continue to be, a senior advisor to very interesting businesses or teams that I believe that I can make an impact. I will continue to do work in boardrooms where I can also bring a perspective. And then a third of my time is going to be education. And sometimes the best way to learn something is if you have to teach it. So I may actually do some stints in a couple of universities to do that. But my main goal is to actually keep learning. So now I have more time to read, which before, when you have an executive role, there is only so many books you can read a month. I think I can double that now. Um, it's important, especially with how quickly we are evolving AI and AI architectures. I mean, the new thing, which is like MCP or A2A, those things didn't exist 3 months ago. And now we're kind of like one of the potentially basic architectures, how applications are going to consume AI services. So I think I find myself as we're in the middle when like TCP/IP was being invented and HTTP became HTTPS, and we finally could have a layer, and therefore
Yeah, but
commerce is like we're at that stage of the internet.
yeah, but those things took years, right? You think about just like, these are months to years kind of thing, right? Now we're like days to weeks, right? In terms of how fast. And this is, I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking, this is like why learning is vital, right? And so you see this, and for those who are listening and who might be in younger part of your career, earlier part of your career, it's just like learning and all these books and reading, and it's vital. But then the second thing is, I think too, is it's like it's like networks too, right? Because I mean, just by speaking with you, I'm learning a couple things, right? That you mentioned, and so it's coupling, your reading knowledge with also networks as well, because we're always going to be behind learning, and now knowledge and information is increasing exponentially. So you're really it's going to be really hard to catch up. So it's an excellent point. Well, Jesus, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Really amazing. Where and how do people stay connected with you on social media?
I think I'm very focused on LinkedIn. I'm not very active on my other handles. So the best way to connect with me is LinkedIn.
All right. Well, so listeners out there, make sure you give a like and a follow to Jesus and keep up with all the amazing things that he has coming up. Jesus, thanks for making it a priority to be on the Exponential Growth podcast, and we wish you tons and tons of continued success.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, David.